Good afternoon. Welcome to the second of 4 Psychology Department Speakers Series this year, second one of this semester. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Sarah Domoff. Dr. Domoff is a clinical psychologist and a professor at Central Michigan University. Dr. Domoff did her undergraduate degree at the University of Connecticut. Her PhD is from Bowling Green, and she did her postdoc at the University of Michigan. I believe I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Frank Connor. I'm the chair of the psychology department. I'm sort of irrelevant other than getting this set up. So if you would, please welcome today's speaker.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Everyone hear me okay? Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's my first time on campus, and it's beautiful. I ate at the Heritage Restaurant, and that was awesome. So thank you again for having me. So today, the title of my talk is Child Development in the Digital Age. How and for whom does mobile media use become problematic? So just to kind of orient you to what I'll be speaking about today, this is a really big topic. So the objectives I would hope that you leave here with an understanding of how screen media and mobile device use may impact child's social, emotional development and academic achievement. And just to define 2 terms, when I say screen media, I mean media delivered through a screen. So not magazines or books, but laptops, computers, TV, video games. And then mobile device use refers to smartphones and tablets. Secondly, I'd love for you to be able to leave here with the ability to think about and distinguish between normative or typical versus problematic use of screen media during childhood. So, as you all probably know, we live in a digital age. Teenagers, 13 to 8 years old, average 9 hours of screen media use per day. This is a lot. And children 8 to 12 years old use approximately 6 hours of screen media per day. And we're seeing that not only is the amount of screen time increasing for youth, we're seeing that children at younger ages are getting access to mobile devices and access to more opportunities to view screen media. Now, in 2013, about 40% of families with children years 8 and under owned tablet devices. But more recently, we found that by age 4, nearly 75% of children own their own mobile device. And I believe recent research just came out stating that that number was higher for thinking about families with children 8 years and younger. Most of them have access to a mobile device of some sort, including a tablet or their own, like a smartphone. So screen time, media use is growing, and children at younger ages are gaining access to their own mobile devices. Now, in terms of my research, a lot of my work focuses on diverse children's use of media. So children from lower income backgrounds, racially, ethnically diverse children, and how they use media. And we know that low-income children and racially, ethnically diverse children have the highest amounts of screen time. And this is especially problematic given the negative correlates of screen time. Specifically, Black youth use screen media an average of 2.5 hours more than their white peers. And lower income teens spend an average of 3 hours more using screen media than their higher income peers. So we're seeing disparities in how much children use screen media. And if this was all pro-social and educational media, you probably wouldn't have me here today.
Excuse me, is that per day?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Feel free to jump in with questions. Now, it's not just kids and teens. We also use our devices a lot, right? Adults in the U.S. spend over 10 hours using screen media per day. And children are potentially affected by this. We have over half of children report that their parents check their devices too often. 32% of children report that they feel unimportant when their parents get distracted by the phone. One of my collaborators at U of M did this really interesting study looking at how families use mobile devices in fast food restaurants in the Boston area. And she found that 70% of adults use mobile devices during meals. And later research has shown that children are more engage in more disruptive behaviors when their parents are on mobile devices, potentially to get their attention. And parents are more quick to respond with anger or frustration to those children when they're on or preoccupied with their phones. So this is really raising some questions about what does this media use look like and what implications does this have for family interactions, for parent-child interactions, for family relationships. The first study I'll be presenting on seeks to answer some of these questions. We know that children are using screen media a lot, parents are, children at younger ages are using mobile devices, but what does this look like actually, what does this actually look like in the household? How do families use screen media, mobile media? Research on this and different theories have been supported looking at how parental mediation or how parents manage and talk to children about their media use can be really important and can buffer against the negative effects of media. Does this still occur in today's digital age? Let me dive a little bit more into parental mediation because this is really important. There's a lot of focus on the negative effects of media, but there's also this protective factor here, the role that parents have in reducing exposure to certain types of media and explaining to children what they're seeing on television. We know that children whose parents use parental mediation have fewer negative effects of media use. And that happens through different types of parental mediation, which I'll briefly explain right now. Social co-viewing just means having a parent present with a child watching TV or media. Restrictive mediation means setting limits. Parents can set limits on what their children see in terms of content and for how long they use media. And then active mediation is the really good stuff, what we want all children to experience, and that's having a parent present explaining the content that they're seeing, labeling character behaviors as good or bad, explaining the motivations behind characters, and really inserting the family's values into what they're seeing on TV to really put that into a context for the child. So parental mediation can be really wonderful and is necessary. Yeah?
Are these studies all done in correlation with schools and how schools use media?
Not yet. So these are a lot of the
Home?
a lot of this is based on parent report of children's use at home, correct. We don't know much about what parental mediation looks like today in our digital environments. We have some ideas of how parents manage internet exposure, but we still have a lot to learn. And so that's where the study one comes in. We know that research has been focused on mediation of TV use and video games. And again, this is primarily through self-report. But we don't know what it looks like in real time in households. And so the aims of this study, this first study I'll present to you, include using observational methods, actually witnessing how children use media in the home and how parents mediate or do not mediate their content. And then identify themes of measured parent-child interactions around media use that are salient in this digital age. So like I said, we have research on how parental mediation works for TV exposure, but does it still occur to the same degree for other types of media? And what's it look like right now in households in the United States? So in this study, it was an observational study. I'll get into the methods of how we captured household media use in a second. So it was a smaller sample. We had toddlers and preschoolers, and approximately 50% were male, majority were non-Hispanic white families. And most mothers in the study report having a high school degree or higher. This is what I'm really excited to share with you today. Has anyone heard of the language environment analysis or LENA technology? It's really, really cool. So it audio records the home environment to provide a deeper understanding of contextual and parent-child interaction factors, potentially salient to media use. So children in our study were the device. It's right there on the bottom of your screen. And little kids put it in a shirt that they're designed to hold the recording device. And they wore it for a couple of days at home. And it recorded all things in their environment. Now, what's really cool about LENA, for people that like me that study technology and media use, is that it tells us when in the hour of the recording an electronic media signal is present. So we can isolate segments of the audio environment that have media present. And we can transcribe or look more deeply at what's happening when TV is on, what's happening when there's electronic media that's audible. And so that's exactly what we did.
Could you explain
Yeah.
the different bars, what
Yep.
the different colors mean?
Yeah, so the yellow indicates the presence of electronic media.
Okay.
And so that's what I was really interested in. There's other types of codes that they have for different types of things in the environment based on acoustic signaling. I was focused on the yellow bars, finding those hours when we had media present, because I want to know how do, if at all, parents talk to their children about what they're seeing on TV or any other type of device that provides audible electronic media. So what we did, we had a lot of data. So we focused on the first hour in which a media signal was present, and we transcribed parent-child communication about media during that segment. These transcripts of parent-child verbal interactions were reviewed by cross-disciplinary experts, so people in somebody from communication studies, developmental behavioral pediatrician, and clinical psychologist reviewed the transcripts and identified themes of interactions around media use. So I want to present to you the 4 themes that emerged. What did we actually see in these homes? So as I mentioned, parental mediation is really important. And I talked to you about some different types, active mediation being wonderful, restrictive mediation, and social co-viewing. What we heard and what we read in the transcripts was that parental mediation was primarily restrictive. It was tech-focused, meaning a lot of it was focused on how to use technology, not really the content of what the child was viewing. So to give you some examples, we have a mother saying to her toddler, no pressing buttons now, just talk to Nana, regarding a child talking on the phone with grandmother. Come on, give me the phone, play a game on the mother's phone. Push next, I'm going to tell you how to play. So it was really focused, the communication around media was focused on instructing the child to use the device and not so much about what the child was seeing on the devices. Does that make sense? How to use the phones and different ways that we charge a phone, for example. So mother would say, okay, someone needs to plug the phone in. It is plugged in. You have to jiggle it a little. It vibrates, that means that it's plugged in. So helping children learn about how to use mobile devices, but not so much what we've studied before about talking about what they're seeing on the mobile devices. So in some, parental mediation was primarily restrictive, so setting limits on use, and focused on actually using the technology versus talking about the content. Now, when we did hear active mediation, though it was uncommon, when we did hear it, it was because the child asked for it or elicited it. Typically, when we study parental mediation, we think about the parent kind of proactively saying, okay, sit down with the child, and this is what you're seeing on TV or whatnot. In our research, we found that it was more often the child that was asking the parent to join in with them in their digital world. So, for example, a child said, what happened in response to a scene in James and the Giant Peach? And the mother explaining what happened. So that's kind of part of this active mediation piece, but it's the child bringing it about. Child saying, I can't watch this one. And the mother asking, is it scary? Uh-huh. Oh, I don't like the villain. So these may seem like pretty simple statements, but really what it's showing is that children are trying to get more parental interaction around their media use, what they're seeing, and they're eliciting it. Now, it probably doesn't come as a surprise to most of you, but we heard a lot of negotiation between parents and children about screen time. So, for example, we had one interaction, mother saying, okay, trying to set limits, you get 5 minutes of TV, it's too late already today. And the child saying, I want to watch TV for 10 minutes. No. What about 9 minutes? No. Can I play on my iPad? What do you guys think? Yes, you may play on the iPad. Isn't that something? And the child spends time on the iPad. And it's not watching pro-social or educational media in this example. It was actually a glorified advertisement. So, think about that and how parents perceive or may perceive mobile technology. And it's benefits when, if you're not seeing what the child's actually viewing, what they could be exposed to, right? So that was the third theme. When we did hear this back and forth, it wasn't processing content, it was, I want to get more time, or can you give me this mobile device? What I think is really kind of descriptive of what at least the households we observed looked like was what we're calling parallel family media use. So we observed children being exposed to multiple types of screen media in the home, with devices being used at the same time by different family members across all the age groups. So this is, reminder, this is including children as young as 1 year of age. So examples of this type of parallel family media use include, preschool-age children were exposed to other family members using their own devices while they independently viewed media. So we heard siblings use separate devices at the same time. So it's this concept of together alone. They're together, but they're not present with the same media. What is of great concern to clinical psychologists, people that study a child's academic functioning and what can get in the way of success in school, is what we saw around media multitasking, and I'll define what that is. I'm going to give you some more examples of the negative impact of media multitasking in a few slides. We often heard TV on in the background while children and their parents were using mobile devices. So children at young ages are media multitaskers. They are playing with a device and watching TV, using multiple media at the same time, media multitasking. And this is really concerning because we know that that has negative associations with a variety of cognitive outcomes for at least adolescents and young adults. This is showing that this needs to be studied at younger ages because it's happening today with younger children. So this observational study gives us some evidence that there are changing practices in how families use media. Now, granted, this was a small study. We definitely hope that this encourages people to do larger scale studies using surveys if they can to capture some of the things that we saw here to see how widespread it is, predictors of this type of use in the home, and what that means for the child's development. We did hear a limited amount of parent-child engagement around media use. When it did occur, it was because the child asked for it and the child got it to happen. We actually also heard siblings mediating the content for their younger siblings. And so siblings may be playing an even greater role in media management in the households today. Multiple media, mobile devices may challenge parental mediation efforts. So it's really hard to mediate content that you can't see if you're on your phone across the room and your child's on the tablet. So it's really challenging parental efforts to manage and talk about what the child is seeing. Thinking about what the media use was like in these homes, it made me wonder if I were to call a family up and ask them how many hours they used screen media that day, I don't know if they'd be able to tell me accurately. Because if most of the family members are using their own media, how can you report on your child's media use if you're using media? It was just really remarkable how much media and different types of media were being used, that it's really going to necessitate us using things like passive sensing, which automatically captures what people are doing on their phones and can give that information to researchers to capture that amount of use and what type of use. And in one of my future studies, we will be using an app to capture this on adolescents' phones. So that way we won't be as reliant on self-reports. Yeah, quick question. Yeah.
When the children wear the device and you study the interaction between parents
Yeah.
and child during the media use, does that take into account the context of what they're watching? Like if something's informational and you won't have to interact with the kid as much because it is a teaching video or something compared to watching a movie where you kind of need to explain what's going on. You don't take that into account?
Yeah. We did not take into account the content, but I do want to emphasize that even if it's pro-social or educational media, we do want parents present with that child one-to-one, talking to them about what they're seeing, because kids retain information from positive media like that or instructional media better when they have an adult scaffolding the content and talking to them about it. So even though it's better content, we still would highly encourage parents and teachers to be present with that child processing the content. That's a great question, though. Yeah.
You might have said already, what was the length for the study as far as time it was included?
So it was just the first hour in which a media signal was present.
Okay, and then also,
Yep.
what level of information was given to the parents prior to this test? Just obviously, like, the bias of knowing that they're being observed. What level did they know?
That we were going to observe and listen to whatever was in their child's environment. So it's been coded for other types of how children are communicated to about different types of things besides media. Parents had the option to not submit. Obviously, they could decline participating in this and not share certain segments if they didn't want us to hear them. So, but yeah, I think you bring up some good points about, you know, the observer effect, like how you made great point. So there are limitations, obviously. The goal with this type of research is just to try to describe a new phenomenon in our society and encourage other people out there to study this, to quantify it across the population. We definitely want, I'm really interested in how often this family parallel media use is happening and what impact that has on how parents and children interact with each other and their relationships and the child's social development. That's definitely to come. I'll take another question before I move on to my conceptual framework.
So parents weren't told that they were observing the media use?
Correct. Correct.
Okay, so parents could monitor that, obviously. You were told that you were being monitored.
Yep, so
Make them use less?
say that one more time.
Because you said it was self-reporting.
So the children wore the device all day in the home. So they had, the parents knew that the child was recording what was in their environment. But it wasn't like we told them, we're going to look for when you talk to them about this, or we're going to see how you talk about feeding practices. We didn't tell them specifically what we would be transcribing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I want to just present this to you to give you a kind of dive into how I think about and study children's media use. So we know there's a lot more screen time today than there was when we were younger, that children at younger ages are gaining access to mobile devices, and family dynamics around media use have been changing. So what does that mean for a child's development? There are 3 different mechanisms that have been studied and that I'm interested in studying, looking at how does actual media use in children affect their development. And there's 3 different mechanisms or processes. The first one is called time displacement. So if children are spending time watching TV, they're not spending time doing something else that could be good for their development. So if they spend most of their time playing video games, that's not multiplayer, just single player video games, they're not spending time socializing with other peers. So it's this idea of we take time away from something that could be beneficial to the child. What I've been seeing a lot more in the research, and the 2 mechanisms that I look at specific to how media use affects a child's health and their well-being, are these bottom 2 mechanisms, and I'll talk about those more in-depthly. So one is that it's not so much how much time children use media, but what they see. So the content matters. And the second is interference with other contextual behavior. So with mobile devices, viewing media through your mobile device, you can take that anywhere. And when you use the mobile device, when you view media, can matter maybe more so than how much time you spend with that media. And I'll tell you what I mean in just a second. So in terms of content, many of you have probably heard about how viewing violent content can influence antisocial and aggressive behavior in children. We also see negative associations between viewing violent content and school achievement. We see that viewing violent content or aggressive content can negatively influence executive function, especially ability to focus and sustain attention. So there's a lot of research on how content matters. This is true for viewing sexually explicit media. Viewing commercials can have a negative impact on children because it makes them want to desire or request those things that are advertised, like fast food. But I do want to point out, and I do focus a lot on the negative, but I should point out that we see positive outcomes for positive content. So content matters. Educational programming for preschoolers can have a positive impact on cognitive development, including vocabulary, literacy, social behavior, academic knowledge. And so programs like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers, those are pro-social educational programs that have been developed by people that know about child development and how to promote these positive things for kids. So content matters in both good and in bad ways. What a lot of my next studies will be focusing on is how and when children and adolescents use media. The context of media use matters. I want to focus on bedtime because that's going to be one of my big projects next semester in our tech and teen study. We're going to be looking at how adolescents use mobile devices after bed and if that affects their sleep and their functioning the next day using passive sensing, so automatically tracking what they do on their mobile devices. What we do know from prior research is that having a television in the bedroom is a major health risk. It predicts increased obesity risk beyond overall TV viewing time. So again, the context matters. Screen media use around bedtime may stimulate children, especially if the content is fast-paced or violent, which has also been found to associate with greater sleep problems in preschoolers. And what do sleep problems look like in kids when they go to school? What do those kids look like? Kids that don't get enough sleep. Hyperactive, impulsive. So we have sleep is so important for everything, right? And so media use around bedtime, the context of when you view media, matters for a child's development. We know that shorter sleep duration is associated with metabolic disturbances. And sleep deprivation has been associated with increased desire for high-calorie foods, along with decreased activity in the frontal cortex and insular cortex regions of the brain. It's responsible for evaluating hunger. So I don't know if you all have experienced this. When you don't get enough sleep, the next day you want to eat junk food, or you may not feel as full as you would if you had enough sleep. So you're seeing media use, especially with its impact on sleep, being a big mechanism linking screen time to child health and development. And it's not just bedtime. Think about any context that's important for child development and child functioning. Think about academic-related time. We see a negative effect on academic outcomes when youth use media or mobile devices when learning or studying. We have a majority of college students report using electronic media while in class, studying, doing homework. That sound about right? And this may begin as early as 5 to 8 years of age. And many children have to deal with background TV, background media, while working on homework, which has been shown to slow them down and decrease accuracy. And then media multitasking, which I reported to you as being common even in younger children, has been found to be negatively associated with older students' GPA. So again, the theme of it's not how much necessarily, but when children are using media that may have an impact on their health and development. I want to talk a little bit more about media multitasking. This is common. Of the 8 hours youth use, that youth use using screen media per day, 29% of the time involves media multitasking. So heavy media multitaskers, those who watch and use multiple media at the same time a lot, show differences in their cognitive abilities. So this is important for people like me who do testing and assessment of what may be causing problems in academic success. Heavy media multitaskers often have poor working memory, poor interference management. They have difficulty on tasks requiring sustained attention, and they underperform on tests of relational reasoning, inhibitory control, and long-term memory. So basically, it's not just how much, but it's how youth use media, when they use it. That can have an impact on different outcomes for them, right? Yeah?
Just a clarification here. You're looking at so the heavy media multitaskers is identified as a population, and then you're using that population and giving them independent assessments outside of media usage than comparing them to a low media use population.
Yep.
So these results have nothing to do with the technology itself. It has to do with that relationship between that population.
Exactly. That makes sense to everyone? Yeah.
So, I just had a thought in my head. So it's important to know, especially if like kids who have cognitive issues, you can kind of pinpoint what's going on in their environment that can contribute to those versus someone who is like has predisposition to have like ADD or to have those kind of cognitive like.
Yeah.
So when you evaluate people, you can like see what's going on in their environment, and that might be a contributing factor. And when you change it, it would change the behavior, and then actually that person, actually didn't really have ADD. It was just because of what's going on in the environment.
And that's a hypothesis that needs to be tested. This is what the results suggest that definitely need to be tested in greater detail using intervention designs. Now, I should note that there are some youth who are more susceptible to media effects. There's this differential susceptibility to media effects model. Basically, in a nutshell, means that youth who may be most affected may also be naturally drawn to this type of use of media. So youth who have ADHD symptoms may be more drawn to or play more video games that are fast-paced. But we see this kind of cycle where they may be initially drawn to it, but it is associated with poor functioning over time. So there's definitely individual differences here that need to be studied. I do want to point that out. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I'll take one more question, then move on to the next objective. Those are young adults. So this has not been studied in children yet, and that's definitely something that needs to happen. Like college-age students. Yeah. So we have a lot more to study in terms of what this looks like in children. Sure. Great question. So the second objective I had for you for this presentation is we know that youth are using media a lot, and we know different ways that media may affect children. But when does it become problematic? When does it become a clinical concern, if you will? Obviously, content matters. When they use it matters. But what about those youth whose parents say they think that they may be addicted to using social media or using mobile devices? What's normal versus not? Well, in the literature, there's been 3 types of problematic use defined. One is this excessive or addictive-like use. Use that interferes with functioning. Risky use. So for example, use while driving, sexting, use that can harm the user themselves or others. And then antisocial use, which cyber victimization, cyberbullying would fall under. Use that harms others on purpose. I should make a point to say that a lot of youth spend a good amount of time using screen media, and their use doesn't seem to interfere, if you will, with their functioning. So it's not that all children show these types of problematic media use. It's a small proportion, but it still matters. We see a lot in the media this really blowing up of how media use is all bad and that all kids can be addicted. And that's definitely not the message I want to give you today. I want to talk about what are the different ways and behaviors that may indicate a problem with using media, with the caveat that for most youth, it doesn't become a problem. So the examples I'm about to give you are really more clinical examples, okay? So in terms of problematic media use, most of this research has been studied or done in adolescent populations. Pathological gaming or video game addiction has been the type of problematic media use that's been studied the most. So much so that in our diagnostic manual, in section 3, they have a internet gaming disorder listed. Now, this is not something I could diagnose right now, but it's something that they want to have more research on and to see if this is an actual disorder that exists that we'd want to include in the DSM-6. Given what I shared with you about children at younger ages using mobile media, a question comes up as to could these symptoms manifest in children, younger children, so children under age 14. So could we apply these 9 symptoms, these 9 criteria to kind of quantifying problematic media use in younger children? So this is where my second study that I'll be presenting today comes in. My collaborators and I developed the problematic media use measure, or PMUM. Now this, as I mentioned, these items were generated based on the criteria of internet gaming disorder in DSM-5. And the content used to generate these items are questions drawn from the literature on problematic media use, clinical experiences, so working with families whose children had issues with gaming or other types of media that were causing problems in their lives, and interviews that we did with mothers in Michigan about their experiences in managing excessive use of media. 60 items were generated. We sent them to experts around the country, experts from different disciplines, but who studied behavioral addictions or media-related or screen media-related addictions. And they gave us feedback, and we revised it. And this is before we actually carried out the study. To give you some background, this is the measure instructions. Now, we wanted to keep it broad enough so that it could be used as a screener, that clinicians, pediatricians could use this as a way to see what symptoms were being endorsed by parents if they needed to talk to them about it in more depth in the office. So this is a parent report form. And we asked them to think of any type of screen media or devices that their child uses. And we asked them a variety of questions that tap into those 9 criteria. So this is what the PMUM short form looks like. 9 items, 1 item per symptom. And so the types of questions are not how many hours does your child use media, it's what are the behaviors around media use that may cause problems in the child's life. So my child's screen media use interferes with family activities. It causes problems for the family. Child becomes frustrated when he or she cannot use screen media. We heard parents talk about how the child won't go to sleep at night so in order to keep gaming, refuses to go to school in order to keep playing video games or use a tablet. When my child has had a bad day, media is the only thing that seems to make him or her feel better. So really symptoms of problematic use. You see how this is different and more clinical than the typical questions we may ask just about overall media time? So in terms of the method, and this was just recently published in the Psychology of Popular Media Culture, we recruited parents, mothers, for the first part of the study, ages 4 through 11 years old on Amazon, MTurk. They completed the PMUM, the full measure, and additional measures to test validity. So they answered questions as best they could about child screen time, about if they had concerns about the child's media use, and then psychosocial functioning difficulties with the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, basically capturing those subscales of potential problems in the child's life. So peer relationship problems, hyperactivity, impulsivity, emotional symptoms, and so forth. We had 291 mothers who reported on their youngest child in the home. Most commonly used media in this sample was tablet, not different from television. More recently, television was still the most popular used media, but now it seems that tablets are reaching the same level. 69% of children in the sample own their own mobile device. Again, showing how common this is, and at younger ages, children are owning their own devices. And on average, children receive their first mobile device at age 7. Average daily screen time was 5.47 hours in this sample. So we did a variety of data reduction analyses to select the items that were most consistent with this concept of problematic media use as an overall factor. We found, to test convergent validity, we looked at correlations between the PMUM score, so how parents reported on that measure about children's problematic media use, and screen time. And mother-reported worry about child media use. To determine incremental validity, we did multiple regression analyses to determine whether that measure we developed accounted for significant variance in these child's functioning over and above screen time. Exploratory factor analyses indicated that this was capturing a unidimensional factor structure, just meaning that these symptoms capture this overall construct of problematic media use. We selected the 3 highest loading items per symptom to create a final scale of the 27 items for the full scale and a 9-item version for the short form. We saw great internal reliability and evidence for convergent validity. That higher scores on the problematic media use measure associated with more screen time, which makes sense. If parents are, if parents report problematic media use, more likely than not, the child has a lot of screen time. And mothers' own reported worry about their child's media use. What's really important is this table here in terms of incremental validity. More often than not, pediatricians or even researchers like myself measure or quantify children's media use by how many hours they use screen media. For a while, it was just number of hours was what was defined as the problem. And there have been guidelines that pediatricians had about how many hours was too much. And so typically, we ask parents, how many hours does your child use screen media as a proxy for what could be a problem or what could interfere with the child's functioning? What we found with the PMUM is that it did a better job in predicting total dysfunction in the child's life than total amount of screen time. So even when we controlled for screen time, the PMUM score associated with overall indices of child functioning, indicating that this may be more valuable or predictive than just asking parents about how many hours their child uses screen media. We confirmed the factor structure of this scale in an additional sample of 600 parents and confirmed the factor structure in the 9-item version. And we found that it works equally well for boys and for girls, and also supported additional analysis of convergent validity. And so there are a lot of strengths to this measure, and that it's suitable for children aged 4 to 13. And up to this point, we didn't have a measure out there that would capture this addictive-like or problematic use of media. It was really specific to adolescents. So it's looking like, based on this study, that this measure could do a good job at that. Now, we see here that how children use media may be more predictive than how long they use media. But there are several limitations of the study that I want to point out, that I hope that having this measure will encourage researchers to study this further. We don't know if there are certain children who are at more or greater risk for excessive or addictive-like use of media. Some people have posited that maybe kids with poor self-regulation have more problematic media use, or does more problematic media use associate with poor self-regulation, or do we find support for both, like with the model I mentioned earlier, the differential susceptibility to media effects model? That maybe some children are just with poor emotion regulation are more likely to use media excessively or mobile devices excessively, and that in turn takes time away from those opportunities to learn how to self-regulate, and then associates with poor self-regulation. We don't know yet. We also don't know if these behaviors reflect a distinct syndrome. When, my initial impetus for studying this was, as a result of some of my clinical experiences. Could these behaviors reflect something, a separate disorder, or is this just a manifestation of symptoms related to screen media that is part of a different disorder, like ADHD or autism spectrum disorder? We don't know that yet. But we do know that parents are really concerned about this, and they want to know if their children are using media in problematic ways. And up to this point, we weren't really sure what behaviors best corresponded to problems in functioning. But now we have something, and I really do hope that researchers take this and validate it in other samples and see if it does in a longitudinal study associate with longer-term outcomes.
So thinking about this as a predictor or morbidity or
Mm-hmm.
looking at, have you looked at the data on the known percentage of disorders present in a population?
Mm-hmm.
So we know roughly how much ADHD is
Mm-hmm.
reported, we don't know how much spectrum disorder is. Have you then tried to overlap these data with that to see, do they overlap, or are they identifying a distinctly new population?
Mm-hmm. And that's what we definitely want to do. This again was in 2 samples that do not represent the population at hand. That would be a great research question for certain. We will be testing this in for children who are getting treatment at our ASD assessment clinic to see if we see differences in problematic media use in children who have diagnoses of different types of different clinical diagnoses. But yeah, I definitely think there's more to come. This was just the first tiny step. It's a great question. Any other questions about this measure? Okay. So we are also looking at, do those 9 symptoms also exist for not just gaming, but addictive-like use of phones in teens? Again, similar symptoms, adolescent report. And a future study, we're going to be looking at how do these teens, what are some predictors of addictive phone use in adolescence? Do we see differences in adolescents' brains for those who report being addicted to phones versus not? And so we have just completed an fMRI study looking at this, and I'm happy to share those results as they emerge. Again, it's this question of, is this addiction, is this behavioral addiction something that's distinct? Do the measures that we have capture this phenomenon? And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm really excited about it. So in addition to addictive-like use of media, trying to get at what makes it problematic, in addition to the behaviors that I listed before and use that interferes with a child's functioning, there's also risky and antisocial use. Risky use, as I mentioned before, is use that can harm the youth doing the posting. We have sexting, for example, or excessive disclosure or inappropriate sharing based on norms of peers. Whereas with antisocial use, it's use that can harm others, so cyberbullying, cyber-victimization, trolling or harassing others online. We recently developed an intervention to help teens who have been hospitalized for suicide attempts use social media in healthy ways and to decrease maladaptive use that may have or may not have been related to some of the depressed mood and suicidal ideation that they endorsed. Some high-risk adolescents may use social media to post content that includes threats to commit suicide, saying goodbye or announcing plan to commit suicide, and disclosing sensitive or private content. So in these examples, I want to know as a clinician what my teens are using in terms of their apps, but also what they share, what they post, how they make decisions about what to post. Because some of these examples of risky use, obviously, these are really high-risk examples, but we also have teens sharing that they post things that they regret, that may not reach this level of severity, but that they regret later on, and they feel embarrassed about. And so what we're really trying to do is help teens use social media in ways that is healthy and protective. And so we just developed an intervention to do that. And if I have time at the end, I'll definitely show you the components of that intervention. I want to briefly get into what clinicians can do, because I know we have some clinicians out here in the audience. Before I jump into that, I would love to answer any questions that you have about how children use screen media, you know, what that may mean for their development, when it becomes problematic. Are there any examples that I didn't share that you've seen in your lives about problematic media use that can get in the way? Yeah.
I guess for the children that don't have, parents that monitor their media use or have parental controls on what they're doing, the internet is it's a lot of information to absorb, and there's some things that kids shouldn't be looking at. And I think when kids are exposed to those kind of things, it does definitely affect their brain development, because being exposed to adult things at a teenager or even adolescent age.
Exactly. And we're seeing kids at younger ages exposed to online pornography inadvertently because there aren't controls put in place on their devices. And I have resources for those of you who work with parents or are parents on how to do that. I'll put them up at the end. Over to you. Yeah.
I have a question. When it comes to kids, using media and digital stuff, with everything these days being digital and electronic, do you think by keeping your kids away from media and anything like that, will that set them behind since other kids are using it a lot and when everything's going with computers and stuff? Kind of like you teach your grandpa how to text,
Yeah.
computer. Do you think that would put those kids a little bit behind the kids that are always using media and digital stuff?
I think it depends on the age, and there's a lot of different thoughts I have about this. For one, really young children quickly learn. They learn how to use technology very, very quickly. I'm not so concerned about them not being able to know how to use a laptop when they're in kindergarten if they haven't been exposed to it right out of the womb. I'm not concerned about that. For teens, though, most of their social interactions and their social world is online. And so I would hesitate to say no media for kids because that could take away an opportunity for them to interact with others, because a lot of kids use it in healthy ways. I think it should be seen as more like how we teach kids on how to eat healthy foods in moderation. It should be seen as something that's part of our lives that we can't necessarily get away from, but children can learn how to use it in adaptive ways in moderation. But we also have to get buy-in from parents, because it's also tough for us to put away our mobile devices and to not always be on it. So I think there's a lot more that can be done by the adults in this world to shape children's use of media in ways that are healthy. Great question. Yeah.
Kind of similar to that, but has your research or anyone else's research showed what would be kind of sort of the appropriate age for a child to have a phone? I see some 6-year-olds and I think that's ridiculous, but is there kind of an appropriate age?
Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics has some guidelines on this. For children, 0 to 1.5 to having access to mobile technology, if it facilitates social interactions with a loved one, is okay. So if a child wants to Skype with grandma, that's one thing. And just in terms of exposure to any screens. There's a move away from giving exact age limits or age recommendations, because it's not so much the device, it's what they see, how they use it, versus it just being present. So it depends on a lot, and it's kind of growing to be something that we as clinicians and educators need to be able to talk to parents about over time and as the child grows, to determine what would be best for that child. And there's some children, like we found with that measure I developed, that may just have a propensity to be really, really engaged to a problematic level with certain types of media. I really want to know what happens to those kids in school when there's screens all around and what that means for their functioning. And so it also could depend on a child's individual characteristics. There are some children that just not really that interested in mobile devices. They want to play outside. And so the answer is it depends, and it's a lot of thinking to determine what would be appropriate for your own child. Yeah.
I have a question. You talked about 3 items,
Mhm.
media use,
Mhm.
time displacement.
Mhm.
Now, are there guidelines or benchmarks for what an item is that would be beneficial, like to compare it to?
Can you explain that one more time?
Like, as far as time displacement.
Yeah.
So, time spent not doing something.
Right.
beneficial.
Mhm.
Is there like a guideline for what is considered beneficial and how much time they should have doing that, or you should
Yeah.
balance it both?
It is, again, the policy is to move away from giving exact time limits. It should be a balance, a moderation throughout the child's day. The child should be engaged in a variety of activities that promote their development. So a portion of that may be some screen time, but it's important that they have opportunities to play and to get exercise and to interact with people in their environment. What the American Academy of Pediatrics has right now, I can show you real quick, is a family media use plan. And that's a great way to start figuring out what would be best for your own family. So if you guys want to take a picture of this with your phone, the first website right there is, and I don't know if I can get internet access, but basically what it does is has you create goals for your family. It could be, and it may not be specific to time, it may be let's not have devices at dinner time for 3 of the nights this week. And it has you select the different age ranges of your children. And so you can set up different plans for your family or for families that you work with. It's great. Again, they did this because it's, we can't give like black and white answers anymore about what's like the amount of time that beyond which is problematic. I mean, it's too simplistic because for some kids, it could be less amount of time. For other kids, it could be more amount of time. It's more about how they use it and what they see. The content is what really matters.
For those who try to take a picture here, this entire presentation will be online early next week through the Psychology Department website. So you'll be able to scroll
Cool.
forward to YouTube and get to this thing.
Awesome.
So
I'll also put this up on my website as well.
there's a question.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to go back to your comment about risky behavior.
Yeah,
Last
mhm.
time, I'm a former health teacher
Mhm.
in high school.
Yeah.
And one of the areas that I was aware of near the end of my teaching career is using social media, especially the internet, to get information about how to design substances for use.
Mhm.
So how to intensify their usage of different types of drugs.
Yeah, so that, there are some projects that are being funded by the NIH right now to look at, and I didn't speak about that in terms of content, but content related to seeing risky behaviors, whether it's consuming alcohol, using drugs, promoting or normalizing alcohol or drug use or other substances. It's really powerful through social media. And so what the researchers who are experts in that domain are looking at, how does viewing these types of content on social media affect youth? We do see some evidence that it does associate with earlier initiation and use. But that's also, when I say content, it could be any type of content you wouldn't want your adolescent to see that can influence their behaviors in those different health domains. Yeah.
I have a question on if parents actually are engaged in
Mhm.
asking
Mhm.
questions versus the child asking
Mhm.
questions. Does that, like, what kind of difference does it actually make? Is it just like a continuum? 'Cause I imagine no screen time is still probably idyllic, right? And then maybe parents being engaged versus
Yeah.
too much
So
themselves.
we actually don't know a whole lot about differences when children elicit the active mediation versus parents eliciting it. This is something, to our knowledge, hasn't been studied, and that's why it was one of our themes in our research. Was like, wow, this is really interesting. Children are asking for us or trying to get it from their parents, so we don't know about those differences. It could be that children who are more verbal or have better communication with their parents may be doing this, and so they may already have some protective factors related to media use. So it'd be really interesting to see what child factors may be at play in children who are getting more of that active mediation. You know, from a clinician standpoint, I want to know what the child's favorite shows are, their favorite websites, their favorite apps. If the parents don't know that, then that's a moment of intervention where I can do some psychoeducation on that and talk to them about some of this research. With teens, I love asking them about what types of apps they like to use, what's their favorite social media, you know, who do they follow on social media. A lot of them follow like celebrities, so that can kind of give me some insight into what their interests are. So there's a lot of questions that we could be asking in the clinical arena to help understand where these adolescents are at and what they may be seeing that could be risky for them.
I guess I was thinking more like the younger kids with
Uh-huh.
cognitive development, right? Does
Right.
that make a big difference?
Mhm.
Or trying to engage them more
Mhm.
socially, to ask them, like, think about, oh, what happened to that character?
Yeah.
What
We-
did you do? Or-
We know that kids who have active mediation, even if the content is pro-social or educational, have better effects of seeing that type of content. So it's a good thing. We definitely want parents to be more engaged in talking about pro-social and educational content as well, because we do see positive outcomes for those kids.
Still better to read a book, right, to talk about that.
There's some, I definitely think kids should be read to every day. But there are some great programs that do teach children some things. I mean, if that's a possibility, if you can read a book, great. But I think for a lot of families, it's children have to be with their screens, and so we have to do harm reduction approaches in today's age. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. What other question? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I see you back there.
In relation to screen time in children with ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
is it harmful to not have that outlet for them? For, like, I'm not saying video games, or I'm saying just to give them something to do with their energy and all their, I mean, I understand how the gaming could be harmful, but is it harmful to take away that outlet for them?
I
Understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would, if I would work with the parents around other outlets for the child that they enjoy as well. That would involve peers and things that are aspects of where they're at in their development that I want them to be on target with. Mm-hmm.
One more.
Mhm.
So let's say maybe someone in the audience sees this information,
Mhm.
says, okay, my kid is on media too much.
Mm-hmm.
If they have been doing it for a while, could it be harmful, kind of like an addiction, to just go home and say, okay, from now on, could that lead to bad behavior, or is it something you might want to slowly wean down?
So like in terms of too much use, and so that's actually one of the symptoms that was on that measure, remember, was about how it was really hard to get their child away from screen media use. So parents may have tried this and it just did not go well. So as a clinician, what I would do is come up with some sort of treatment plan that would reduce the amount of screen time and increase other types of enjoyable activities, or set limits on child can get this screen time when these things are completed. It's really tough, especially with adolescents and social media. When things go wrong on social media for adolescents, they really don't want to share that with adults because they don't want to lose access to social media because that is their social world. So that's, I think, even more challenging, is to figure out how can we manage the social media of adolescents who may have done harmful things on social media, but yet still allow them to have some sort of social outlet. And it's really tricky. And I think clinicians are going to be more tasked with working with families on these issues. And we need training in this because this is not something that we're trained on in our doctoral programs. Any other questions about the studies? I really just wanted to show you some studies that kind of showcased where my research is going. Observational methods, passive sensing is going to be so critical for studying media use over the next decade, because as you saw in those households, it's really hard to quantify what children are seeing. So I'm excited to do that and see how adolescents use their mobile devices, what apps they're using, what types of apps may be more problematic for sleep and bedtime, and if that in turn has an impact on their health and their academic functioning over time. So we'll be starting up that longitudinal study next semester. And then learning more about that problematic media use, trying to understand what problematic media use looks in clients coming through my door, or children of with different diagnoses. Yeah. I can definitely talk more about what I recommend to clinicians because I know we have some clinicians in the audience, or if you guys have more questions, I'm happy to answer more. Yeah.
As clinicians, based on some of the research, our recommendation that we usually give is no more than 2 hours of screen time, not including homework.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of where most clinicians are selling that, or do you see a spectrum of, and again, I know it's not an exact time,
Yeah.
exact number, it's like you said, the
Mhm.
how, but to start to set some boundaries
Mhm.
on their kids.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a reasonable?
I wouldn't even talk about hours. I think, at least with the mothers that we interviewed, they hear that and they're like, it doesn't matter how much time because my child's watching positive content. I don't know if families, at least the families that I may come in contact with, have like the schedule all planned out for when the child can view screen time. A lot of it's dependent on different factors in their lives. So I would rather talk to them about the content and the internet controls they have in place when the child uses screens. Do they watch TV during mealtime? Do they have TV in the bedroom? Those are the questions that I think are most important. I don't know if telling parents 2 hours a day is meaningful to some families anymore, because I don't know if they could even tell you how many hours a day their child uses media. Yeah.
It seems to me that it's not going to make a much difference for a parent to try and monitor and control the amount of screen time. The parent is equally addicted because
That's another point.
the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Mhm.
And if the child doesn't have those boundaries on them, it's because parents haven't imposed them, and the parents are also as much engaged.
Exactly, and that's the other thing, especially with the observational study that I told you all about. A lot of parents are spending many hours using media or their mobile devices themselves, so it's becoming an issue of reporting and monitoring. And I think we're going to rely more on technology itself to help us manage technology. And there are some initiatives out there from social media giants to act more quickly when bad things are being broadcasted live. Still a long way to go, but I do think that we'll have to partner more with technologists to create interventions that parents can use automatically to reduce some of the negative effects.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Domoff will be here for a little while, so if you want to speak with her in the next 10, 15 minutes, feel free. Thank you all for coming. Let's give her a hand for sharing her research. As I stand up here with a media device, mostly because I just don't have that good a memory anymore, suggesting that I ever did. But for those of you from the community, those of you who are going to be around next semester, just to let you know what we're going to have coming up in the speaker series then, Dr. Jeff Nevitt is going to be here. Those of you who might be in general psych right now, if you take a look at your textbook, you'll see the same name. So it is actually the author of the general psych textbook we're using right now. And Dr. Nevitt does research around unconscious decision making. And so his presentation is Unmasking the Automatic Mind Toward a New Understanding of Unconscious Cognition. So when you make decisions and you don't even know what cognitions are influencing your decision. And then the second one actually is complementary to the one that we just saw. It's Dr. Brian Gibson. And Dr. Gibson is going to be talking about more the cognitive effects of media. His presentation is Media Effects. Can watching TV or playing video games really change how you think and what you do? So Dr. Nevitt's presentation is on Wednesday, February 14th, and Dr. Gibson is on Thursday, March 22nd. They're always from 1 to 2:30. So thank you for coming. And again, if you wish to ask questions, feel free to come up and talk to Dr. Domoff. Thank you.